Hello everybody. Well, it's a very rainy Saturday afternoon. I was going to go to the Great Electric Train Show at Milton Keynes as it's not too far from where I live, but in the end I decided against it for no other reason than just not getting organised enough really, and not being quite motivated enough, mainly because it looks to be mainly 00 scale layouts rather than N-gauge. Unfortunately I missed the Tings exhibition a few weeks ago as well. Something else cropped up that weekend which unfortunately took priority. But having said that, given the weather outside is pretty miserable, I thought I'd come and cheer myself up and run some trains. I've also been really pleased with how my first two videos on my channel have been received. I'm certainly not expecting thousands and thousands of views or subscribers, but even 400 has really impressed me and pleased me that so many of you have liked the video and a number of you have even subscribed. So with that in mind, I thought I might just do a few more videos, perhaps just talking a bit more about how I built Warphampton, the sorts of buildings I've used, just so that those of you who've enjoyed the videos in the past might see one or two more scenes, and also maybe I can share one or two lessons learned, that if I ever was going to build a second railway, perhaps I might just do one or two things differently. I certainly don't profess to be any sort of expert, other than a layout I built in my very early teenage years. Warphampton is only my first main layout as an adult, but as I say, there's one or two things I might do differently if I was to do another layout sometime in the future. So anyway, I hope you find these videos useful, and any comments or questions, just let me know in the comments below. The design for Warphampton was never going to be based on anywhere prototypical. I grew up watching trains in the 80s around Reading Station and Waltham St Lawrence, so I really wanted to incorporate a mainline station along with sort of a 4-track main line to be able to watch trains go by. The benefits of N-scale is clearly you can get a lot more in the space compared to 00, which is where I started out in the hobby. So I knew a reasonable size would give me the ability to run semi-prototypical train lengths, although again I knew I would have to compromise a little bit on the space. As you can see from Warphampton, there are 4 sort of loops. I'll show you in a minute how those split into a double-decker fiddle yard. But those 4 loops also incorporate some bay platforms in the station, along with a small motive power depot, with the theory being that that would allow me to run some loco-hauled trains into the station, have a train, a loco come from the motive power depot to make up the return journey and give me a little bit more operational interest. It's only been recently I've actually got around to kind of setting up some form of automated coupling to try this out, but bay platforms work really well for DMUs as well. The overall dimensions for Warphampton are 3 metres in length and 85 centimetres in width, which as you can see has allowed me to cram in quite a lot. Entirely not probably over crammed in terms of prototypical track plans, but as I say, it's given me plenty of interest over the years. So as I mentioned, the design of Warphampton to maximise the use of space makes use of a double-decker fiddle yard. I spent quite some time in XCAD trying to work out the best ways of squeezing in as many lanes as possible in the fiddle yard for track storage, plus managing reasonable gradients for the 4 loops. In the end, I hit upon the design of using essentially a middle layer on the scenic side, together with then a rising gradient to the top fiddle yard and a descending gradient to the bottom fiddle yard, which as you can see just about gives me enough height to store trains below and above in the fiddle yard. The height difference between the 2 levels of the fiddle yard is 8 centimetres, which was just about enough to obviously store the trains and also provide room for the point motors to manage the points above. I've managed to squeeze in 8 lanes within each level of the fiddle yard. That takes up just about 30 centimetres of the overall width of the board, which seems a good compromise to leave me with 55 centimetres of the scenic section. The fiddle yard design itself for the track plan is the same on the top and the bottom. I make use of 8 individual lanes, but they're connected with a double slip, which means there's a degree of crossover between the outer loop and the inner loop, which has made it very useful for running sort of DMUs and loco hauled services in and out of the bay platforms, because essentially they can cross over between the inner and outer lines as they're required to. The main track work junction, if you like, on Warphampton is probably the one you're seeing here, which allows the 2 outer loops to cross over to the 2 inner loops. I tried to design it so ultimately trains could cross and enter the bay platforms, but actually there just wasn't quite room. I did experiment on XTrackCAD with curved points to try and bring the points further along to give them up that bit more room. But in the end, I just couldn't quite squeeze them in with the right radiuses that would give me that full flexibility. So essentially, there's a crossover in one direction to allow trains to cross. There's also the ability for trains coming on the inner 2 loops to cross into the bay platforms, which gives me that operational interest for DMUs. And there's also the ability for trains to enter the motive power depot from the sort of bay platforms as well. Now, as I've got more used to the sort of correct point work, you'd never see this sort of layout in a real situation. There would be a separate track from the motive power depot over to the bay platform, so that the trains never sort of crossed the main lines, if you like. But again, you know, I didn't have that room, and I probably didn't have the experience to realise sort of the lack of prototypical design this offers. I've also realised obviously trains can travel and cross in one direction, going clockwise, but actually there isn't an equivalent crossover in the other direction, so it's in practice rarely use this crossover, and therefore it's become a sort of an expensive set of points, although I still quite like the look of it. The other design feature I wanted to try and incorporate into Warphampton was what I remember at Reading Station, which was a sort of through fast line between the 2 platforms. So it would allow a sort of fast non-stop HST from Paddington to sort of tear through the middle line. So I built in this junction here to give me that. Again, in hindsight and sort of from operational practice, I've realised 1 or 2 limitations. I used a single slip to provide both the crossover through the fast line for the left hand side, but also to go into the bay platform. But actually, if I'd separated this into 2 separate point junctions, I could have run trains into the left hand clockwise platform at the same time as running a through train through the middle platform. As it stands, you have to be very careful and avoid any head-on collisions if you're running trains in the opposite direction. Hopefully you can see with this simple example here, the blue-grey HST is held up because it can't enter the platform because the fast train is coming across the single slip in front of it. Hopefully you can see at this end though, by using 2 separate sets of points rather than the single slip, it actually means a train can enter the through fast loop whilst the train is also leaving the platform line as well without incurring any sort of head-on collision. So if I'd thought through that at the other end, I would have had slightly more operational fun without worrying about trains colliding each other. So what have I learned from the design of Warphampton? Well, even though I spent some time using XTrackCAD to look at the overall design of the track plan, I think it proves you never can spend long enough planning things out, and it would have probably made sense to actually try and walk through some actual train movements alongside just the look and feel of the track. So if I'd actually maybe sketched it out on paper and pushed pieces of paper along, I might have spotted one or two of the problems that I've incurred around head-on collisions with the wrong point settings, or realising that actually the crossovers weren't as operationally useful as I thought they might be. I've also learned that you've got to be very careful with gradients. So whilst I had to carefully balance the headroom difference between the fiddle yards above and below, it meant in some cases there was quite a steep gradient, particularly on the inner loops, which one or two trains have struggled with, if I'm honest. However, saying that, having the two fiddle yards stacked above each other has given me 16 roads of storage, which has been great. So certainly compared to just a 30cm wide fiddle yard, having the two layers has made a lot of sense. So I think I would just plan to be a bit more careful around the gradients. The split levels worked really well, having the up and the down. That certainly made the gradients more viable. What I also learned with the fiddle yard was that cleaning the track or recovering a derailed vehicle was incredibly difficult with the fixed fiddle yard itself. So I soon learned that I had to create some sort of flip up hinge that would allow me to take the trains off the top and then flip up the top fiddle yard in order to get to the tracks on the fiddle yard below. Having said in conclusion though, the space that Warphampton has given me has meant I've got plenty of scope for running trains, also with the operational interest of running DMUs or loco haul trains into the bay platform. So overall I'm very pleased, and I'm sure if I ever do a second layout I would draw upon many aspects of this layout as well. I hope you've enjoyed watching this short video about the design of Warphampton. In the next video I'm going to take a look at the baseboards and the electrics, so stay tuned.